In this video, I'll show you how to animate a timeline in After Effects. You'll learn about masks and mattes, trim paths, how to add stylized details to make your animations more interesting, and much more. You can download the project files to follow along with the link below. I'm going to assume you know your way around After Effects at least a little bit, but if you're brand new to After Effects, I'll link a video that's a good starting place. I've set up my project file by importing the images and video that I'm going to be using, and I have a new comp called Timeline that's just 1920 by 1080 pixels. I'm going to drag this video into the timeline comp. So we'll start with this video, then we'll mask this video into a circle, and that will be the start of the timeline. I'm going to have these cacao pods be in the middle of the circle, and this video kind of zooms in. So I'm going to have the video start about here. So I'll just trim this layer and then move it to the start of the timeline. Now let's create that mask. So I'm going to go up to the ellipse tool. If you don't see this, click and hold, and then you can grab the ellipse tool. And making sure that your layer is selected, so you're drawing a mask, you can just start to draw out a circle. And to make sure it's a perfect circle, make sure to hold down Shift. I'm going to hit the quotes key to bring up the title action safe guide so I can see this plus sign in the middle to know where the center is. I want to make sure that the mask is centered. So if you want to adjust the mask, you can double click on it to get this bounding box, and then you can either resize it or move it. So I'm just going to make sure that this anchor point for the mask is in the center and actually a little bit higher than center so I have room for my text. Then I'm going to open up the mask properties, and then I'm going to animate the mask. So we start with the full video, then shrink to a circle. So I'm going to go to 2 seconds and 15 frames and set a keyframe for the mask path. And then at 2 seconds, I'm going to expand this mask. So I'm going to double click on the mask to bring up the bounding box and then expand it so that the full video is visible. Let's also make sure that this is centered. So now I have this animation happening. I also want the video to stop playing once it shrinks down into a circle. That way it'll match all of the other ones since I'm just using still images for those. So on this mask MOV video layer, I'm going to right click, go to time, and then enable time remapping. That's going to set keyframes for the time property. And then with my playhead at 2 seconds, 15 frames, I'm going to click here to create another keyframe and then just delete this last keyframe. So now it'll basically just hold this value the whole time. So you can see that the video is no longer playing, but it still plays before. So for 2 seconds, I have the video, shrinks down into a circle, and now we'll start the timeline. I'm going to create a pre-comp to build the timeline in, and you'll see why this makes sense as we go. So in this pre-comps folder that I already made, I'm going to create a new composition, and I'm going to name it Timeline Pre-Comp. And let's make it extra wide. So I'm going to do 4,000 pixels. Let's build out the timeline first and then animate it. Because all of these images are different sizes, if we use masks to crop them into a circle shape, it's going to be hard to make sure that they're all the exact same size. So instead I'm going to use mattes because we have a little bit more control over the exact pixel dimensions of a matte. So what I'm going to do is go into the timeline again and then go to where this circle is, and I'm just going to make sure that no layers are selected, grab the ellipse tool, and then just draw out an ellipse. And I'm just going to try to line this up with this circle just to measure the size of it. And I'm just going to bring down the opacity to make sure that it is the exact same size, which that looks good. Then I'm just going to cut this circle, so Command X, and paste it into this timeline pre-comp. So now we know the circle size that these images need to be cropped to. So I'm going to bring in the first image, and then I'll resize it so that those cacao pods are going to fit into this circle. And now instead of using a mask, I'm going to use a matte. So this circle layer is going to be the matte layer, so I'll just hit enter to rename it. And on the cocoa pod layer, I need to set the matte. So to see the matte options, hit toggle switches / modes to see the track matte options. And then you can just pick whip or drag this spiral from here to here. So from the cocoa pod to the matte. And now we can resize this and adjust its positioning within the matte. But the matte is a separate layer, unlike a mask that's the same layer. Once you like the way that the matting looks, let's take the image layer and parent it by dragging from here to the matte to parent it to the matte layer. That way we can just move the matte layer around and it will move the image. But if we want to adjust the image further, like scaling it or adjusting the position of it, we can still do that without affecting the matte. Next, I'm going to select both of these layers and hit Command or Control D to duplicate them and move them to the top of the timeline. Then I can drag the matte over. And to quickly replace this image, all you have to do is grab the image you want to replace it with, hold down Option or Alt, and drag it on top of the existing image. Now I can hit S to bring up the scale property and just resize this until it looks good, and I can also adjust the position if I want to too. Now you just need to repeat that process on the other two images. Let's make sure that these circles are spaced out evenly. I'm going to select all of the matte layers and hit P on the keyboard to bring up the position property. Remember that there's going to be another circle over here from this original video that we started with. So I'm going to set the first matte's position to 1200 to give enough space over here. Let's give the circles 800 pixels of space between them. So I'll just type in the exact values. And you can even have After Effects do math for you if you're not sure what the number should be. Real quick, I want to let you know that this timeline project was a project that didn't make it into my course, After Effects Explained. If you want to take your motion design skills to the next level by learning how to manage complex projects and polish motion curves to make professional looking animations, this course is for you. The link is in the description. Next, let's create a line that connects all the circles. I'm going to use the pen tool and then start the line over here and then just hold down Shift and click again over here to make a straight horizontal line. To change the stroke color, you can click here and I'm just pasting in a hex code. You can copy this code if you want to. And then let's bring the stroke weight up to like 10 pixels. And I'm going to rename this layer and move it to the bottom of the layer stack. Next, let's go into the main timeline comp and bring this timeline pre-comp in. So I'm just bringing it to the bottom here and let's position this. And I want to make sure that these two circles are evenly spaced. So I'm going to go back into the timeline pre-comp and take this matte layer and duplicate it, and I'll turn on the eyeball. Let's just bring this below. And then I'm going to hit P on the keyboard and adjust this position. So I know that these are supposed to be 800 pixels apart, so I'll just do -800 in here. So it'll calculate where this needs to be. Then I'll go back into the timeline and then just move this timeline pre-comp over so that the circle is directly behind this video circle. And then I'll go back into the timeline pre-comp. Later, I can delete this circle. The point of it was just to help line things up, but let's keep it so we can line up the text. So I'm going to grab the text tool and click to start writing text. And then I'm going to line this up. So my text is center justified. You can find all these options in the properties panel. And I'm going to hit P on the keyboard and I can just type in 400 to make sure that that's perfectly lined up with this circle. And then I'll just duplicate this text and drag it down. And then I'll double click into it to change what the text says. And let's style this font differently. So I'm going to choose light instead of bold. And then I'm going to make it all caps with this button and increase the spacing between the letters. Let's do like 200. And then let's make the font size smaller. And let's just nudge that up a little bit. Let's animate this text because once we duplicate it for all of the other circles, it'll be more efficient if we duplicate an animated version of it. So I'm going to go over to Effects and Presets and then into Animation Presets, then Presets, and then Text. And then I want Animate In. And I'm going to apply one of these preset text animators onto the text. So for the farming one, the top one, I'm just going to bring the playhead to the start of the timeline so it'll start the animation there. And I'm going to use slide down by character. So I'll just either double click with the layer selected or drag and drop onto the layer. I'm going to hit U to show the keyframes that that preset has set. And I'm just going to move my playhead to like 20 frames and then move this second keyframe to speed up this animation. We can close that up. And for the cacao trees text, the bottom text, I'm going to use a different one. I'm going to use the blinking cursor console. And I'll hit U to show those keyframes. After it stops animating, there's still this blinking cursor, so I'm going to get rid of that. At the start of the timeline, I'm going to go up to Effect Controls, which should automatically open, but if you don't see a panel, you can always find it underneath Window. And I'm going to click the stopwatch next to Cursor On Off, and then I'll just hit U on the keyboard twice to bring up that keyframe that just set. So now this is just a checkbox, so on off, it creates a hold keyframe. And so it's going to be on for the beginning, and then once it gets to this keyframe, let's just go one keyframe past that keyframe when it stops animating in and turn the cursor off. So here's what this will look like. Next, I'm going to select the two text layers and hit Command or Control D to duplicate them. Then I'll adjust the positioning to make sure that they're aligned with the second circle and change what the text says. Then I'll repeat this process for the text for all of the other circles. Next, let's animate the circles scaling in. For this, I'm actually going to animate the mats. I'm going to zoom into my timeline and go to 20 frames and then set the scale property here to be 100%, and at the start of the timeline, I'll set it to be 0. Then let's select these keyframes and add Easy Ease by hitting F9, and then I'll go into the graph editor to make this even more interesting. I'm looking at the speed graph, and if yours doesn't look like this, then click this button and make sure that you have speed graph checked. I'm going to click and drag over this keyframe to get these handles, and I'm just going to drag the handles in towards each other so that this motion will be a little bit more extreme. So now it's going to go slow, fast in the middle, and then slow down as it reaches its final scale value. Once you're happy with how that looks, we can copy these keyframes, make sure your playhead is at the start of the timeline, and then paste it on all of these other mats. Obviously, I don't want all of the text and all of the circles to come in at once, so let's go back into the main timeline and start working on adjusting the timing of all of the animations. So it starts with this video, collapses into a circle, and then we'll have the line draw in and then have the timeline move over to start the next circle. So let's have the timeline move over at 4 seconds. So I'm going to hit P on this composition to set a position keyframe, then go to 4 seconds, 20 frames, and move this over. I'm going to center the two circles on screen, and this circle for the video needs to go with the timeline. So I'm going to go over here and then take this pick whip and parent the video to the timeline comp. So now this will move along with it. Let's select these keyframes, and while we're at it, let's do this for the mask too, and add Easy Ease. Then at 2 seconds, 10 frames, I'm going to have the text start animating in. So I'm going to double click into this pre-comp, and then select the farming and cacao trees text layers, and move it to start at the start of the playhead. Now let's work on the timing for the rest of the circles. So if I go back into the main timeline, the timeline starts moving over at 4 seconds. So at 4 seconds, I'm going to have this line start drawing in. So I'm going to go to the line and open it up, and then click this add button and add trim paths. Then I'll open that up, and let's animate the end value. So I'm going to start it at 0% so that the line is not visible, and I'll set a keyframe. And then at 4 seconds, 20 frames, I'll animate this to, should be 25%. Next, we need to adjust the timing of the circles animating in. So I'm going to take the first mat and the cacao pod image and move the layers to where my playhead is now. So once the line reaches there, then it'll start scaling up. And also on this line, I want to make the end of it have a round cap. You can quickly do this in the properties panel by clicking this button. Then I'll move over to 6 seconds. So we'll do a new circle every 2 seconds. And I'm going to animate the line starting at 25% and in 20 frames animating to 50%. And then we'll start the second circle and mat here. So then just repeat this process for the other 2 circles. Now let's go back into the main timeline and animate the timeline sliding over every 2 seconds. I'm going to go to the last keyframe, and let's just make this a nice number so we know that the timeline needs to move over 800 pixels every 2 seconds. So I'm going to change this to 2160, just so it's a nice even number. And then at 6 seconds, I'll set another keyframe for the same value. At 6 seconds, 20 frames, I'm going to decrease this value by 800. And then repeat that for the other circles. Now let's adjust when the text comes in. So I'll go back into the pre-comp, and once the circle is about done scaling in, let's have the text start. Let's go with 5 seconds for this text, and then I'll just repeat that, so every 2 seconds, the text will start coming in. Here's what we have so far. So we have the basic timeline working. You might want to go back and adjust the timing of things. So if this felt a little bit too fast, you could give it like 3 seconds or even 4 seconds before the animation of the next circle starts. And you could also add in some additional details. So if you look at my final version, I have this green circle that kind of starts the movement for the circles, and then I have this extra highlighted yellow circle. So I'll show you how to add those. So I'm going to create a small green circle, and then line it up and rename it. And then I'm going to drag this layer below the circle for the image. Then I'm going to copy the position of the matte layer onto the circle so I know it's in the exact right position. Let's have this circle start at 4 seconds, 15 frames, and I'll animate the scale property. To make the cutout inside of this green circle, I'm going to select the layer and do Command or Control Shift N. That's going to create a mask, and I'm going to open up the mask, and then where it says shape next to math path, I'm going to click and check reset to ellipse. And then if I check inverted and adjust the mask expansion, it will have a cutout in the middle of the circle. So I'm going to animate this mask expansion. So I'll end with it at 0, and then at the beginning of this layer, let's animate it to a big negative number so that the circle will be filled in. So it'll start to have a cutout like that. And of course, you want to make sure that you easy ease your keyframes and make them look more interesting in the graph editor. Now let's add a yellow circle highlight. I'm just going to duplicate this circle because I know it's in the exact right position. And then I'm going to rename it. And let's change the color. I'll copy this hex code and make this circle a yellow fill. And let's make this circle bigger than the image. So I'm just going to adjust the size property in the properties panel. And let's also get rid of that mask. So I'm going to hit M to bring up the mask properties and just hit delete. Let's have the highlight circle start maybe around 5 seconds. And let's also bring it below the green circle. I'm going to animate the opacity property so that this fades out. So I'll bring up the keyframes that are already set so I know where to animate to. And then I'm going to hit T for the opacity property, animate this to 0%, and let's start it only at like 30% so it's not so intense. If you want to stylize these detail circles a bit more, you could add a layer style. So I'm going to right click on the layer, go to Layer Styles, and add an outer glow. Then I'll open up those properties, and let's just select the green color for the color of this glow and increase the size. And let's just set this to normal. So that just gives it a nice little glow effect, and we can copy this, paste it onto the highlight circle, and then maybe instead of making it green for the outer glow, we can just sample the yellow color. I'm just going to sample it from the line. So that just kind of softens the edge of this highlight circle. Then you would just want to duplicate these circles for all of your other timeline circles. First, I'm just going to give them a different label color. So I'm going to click this little blue square here and just set this to something else like orange, just so I know that these are the detail layers. So here's what the final animation looks like. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, happy animating!